Hello and welcome to the Tape to Tape podcast powered by the Ram 1500 Sport, built exclusively for Canadians. Rory, we flipped to a new month here. November 1st, we are going to look back at October and talk about a few things we learned from a month of NHL hockey. We're also going to speak to Erik Erlendsson, the Tampa Bay Lightning insider, and find out what's going on with the Bolts, who have been anything but the team we expected, I would say, so far. And picking up on that, the first thing as we comb over what happened in October that kind of stands out to me as I flip through the Canadian teams and I see the Vancouver Canucks with the best points percentage, the Edmonton Oilers with the second best, and the Montreal Canadiens with the third best. What the heck is going on with the teams we thought would be good or some version of good? Winnipeg, Toronto, and Calgary, a giant nothing burger so far. Now, Winnipeg obviously has had some things going on, and
expectations had to be changed.
It had been altered a bit.
Yeah.
But those teams are basically 500 clubs right now.
Yeah. So, like we said, Winnipeg, your blue line is decimated. The expectations for them had to be lowered immediately. So, not a shocker that they're off to the start they are right now. I thought Sean Reynolds did a nice piece for Sportsnet.ca today looking at the Scheifele-Wheeler combo. Maybe we should just call it the Scheifler combo. Who basically never gets split up, right? There's always that third winger that's being moved in and out. It's Ehlers,
even though we've seen
Connor,
Wheeler play
Laine.
Center in Scheifele's absence.
In his absence, but when they're together, when they're in the lineup at the same time, they never get moved off. They were moved off of the line in the Heritage Classic for a very brief amount of time. Sean pointed out that it only happened once that he could recall last year in a blowout loss to Colorado. So it's not something they've really tried yet, but it might open up some new possibilities up front. Obviously, Wheeler's not getting off to the start that a lot of people hoped, certainly as fantasy owners.
Yeah.
And these guys are the veterans who have done this for so many years. They have earned the right to kind of push through these slumps whenever they do happen. But now it's not just them slumping. It's the team needing to find a new, not so much an identity, but a way to win games. And maybe that's the way that you can do it. And for a team like Toronto, you know, there is some bad luck in there. Like, I think there's a couple factors. Having John Tavares out of the lineup is big. The tough schedule. Freddie Anderson's numbers are down, and you just have to believe that's going to course correct. Freddie Anderson has been one of the most consistent netminders in the game, and that's all you want right now is a guy who's going to perform at that level. I have to believe he's going to bounce back, and when it happens, it's just naturally going to start happening for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Might not solve the problem of him playing too much still, but he's going to get back.
That's a whole other discussion, and then you got to weigh how important the division title is to you versus going into the playoffs fresh. But, of course, you got to make it to the playoffs first and all that stuff. And the Calgary Flames, I mean, it's really hard to know what to make of them because they can look great and then they can look absolutely horrible. The way their game Thursday night started, I mean, they ended up winning it somehow.
Yeah, a wild one in Nashville.
Absolutely a crazy game. But Nashville was taking it to them in the first period, plus in that game. It looked like one of those games where, again, Calgary was going to get hammered. They were going to get outshot by 40. It wasn't even close. And when they fell behind, I can't remember, it was a 3-goal deficit they were down by or whatever it was.
It was 4-1 in the third.
It was 4-1. It was already starting to turn to A, when is Bill Peters going to blow up on this team, and B, how long is the rope for Bill Peters? And then they end up winning the game.
Crazy, right?
It's insane. But this is what happens in the early season. It's less obvious for me that Calgary is going to bounce back. Like the Leafs, it just seems like that's the way it's going to unfold for the team. There's some bad luck. For the Flames, it's just they're not playing the same. Johnny Gaudreau doesn't seem to be doing the same kind of things. They have split up Monahan and Gaudreau. It looks like they're going to be back together. But they have split them up and tried that. It just seems like they do need each other. But again, it's the same old problem there where Matthew Tkachuk is on your second line. Michael Backlund isn't an offensive driver. He's more of a defensive specialist, a great player though. But they don't have a secondary scoring line to support that. Mark Jankowski's, Sam Bennett, Michael Frolik, these are all good players, but they're not going to give you that little oomph of offense that can help a team like Toronto with all the depth and scoring they have. it does come down to David Riddick needs to be as good as he's been. If that ever falters in any way, then there's going to be a whole bunch of new issues for the Calgary Flames. But it might be a tougher road for Calgary to fully bounce back. It's to win the division title again is going to be an uphill battle. But I don't know. Like to me, Calgary's the one I'm most worried about.
Yeah.
Toronto's the one I'm least worried about, and Winnipeg's kind of doing what we should expect. Maybe they're equal to what we should expect given the decimated blue line.
We'll get Ian McIntyre on here, who covers the Canucks for Sportsnet, of course, to talk more about Vancouver soon, because I think it merits a bigger conversation.
Really
but just
good
quickly,
story.
I think we have to touch on
absolutely.
Pettersson, JT Miller on that line, been a great fit. The goalies have been good. Thatcher Demko, when Markstrom had to return home to Sweden, stepped in and was great. I mean, they blew a 5-1 lead against the Washington Capitals at home, but that's about the only blip right now.
Yeah, I mean, we knew Pettersson was great. The points didn't start coming immediately, but he's got 10 in his last 4 now.
Quinn Hughes,
I mean, he's going to be in that Calder Trophy discussion all year. When they made a couple things here, when they made that trade for JT Miller in the summer, it was curious because they were giving a first-round pick back to Tampa Bay. It was either going to be this year or next year. It's lottery protected. But that really kind of defined Vancouver's window for when they needed to get back into the playoffs. You better get back in one of these next 2 years, or else you're giving Tampa Bay potentially a top 10 pick or top 5, or maybe even they win the lottery and get number 1, and that would look terribly. But Benning believed in this roster, and he believed that JT Miller would be a nice fit there. And I think there's something to be said for he was basically a 20-goal, 50-point guy for the New York Rangers. Didn't kind of live up to that level for Tampa Bay last year, but I think that more had to do with his place in the lineup and everything else going on there than anything in his game, and that's shown. Him and Elias Pettersson have been a tremendous combo. Andrew Berkshire wrote a great analytics look at them on sportsnet.ca on Friday morning, and they are just absolutely leading the charge. One of the best duos, making up one of the best lines in the entire league through the first month of the season in the way they create chances and high-quality chances and everything like that, and now it seems to be coming together. So if that duo... if this is not a mirage and that sticks, then that trade is going to be absolutely worth it. And I think what was interesting, what he pointed out is Pettersson was able to do these kind of things on his own last year, but it didn't have any effect on anybody else. So when you looked at his rates relative to the league, they didn't stand out even if they were good within his own team. But the way those two now together are kind of supercharging everything, it's helped lines 2 and lines 3 also with lesser defensive coverage create those chances. So now it's kind of that was rising tide lifts all boats. Everything is coming up for the Vancouver Canucks now. So they're driving one of the best lines in the NHL through 1 month of the season, but it's also helping the rest of Vancouver's lines create chances and create more goals. And so that's obviously having a huge effect. The defense has been great. I'm sure everybody's waiting for that first Alex Edler or Chris Tanev injury or something like that and how they deal, but Olli Juolevi has been fantastic in the AHL so far this season. So maybe you're better prepared to handle that than we originally thought. And finally, the other thing is what you alluded to there is Thatcher Demko has been great stepping in for Jacob Markstrom, who is a UFA at the end of the season. Talk is going to start to build on when they need to make a decision between those two guys, but I don't think they necessarily have to, right? Like with the NHL going the way it is, where you need tandems now, splitting starts and all that stuff, you don't have to give up Jacob Markstrom to keep Thatcher Demko. It's probably better to keep Markstrom around for another 2 or 3 years, go forward with this tandem, and then by the time that contract is up, maybe Michael DiPietro is ready to come up. Who knows what happens, and you kind of give Thatcher Demko a few more years to ease him in rather than, okay, boom, we had this good season, now you're the starter.
Yeah, it's true. It's
sink
not
or swim.
ideal.
Yeah.
Man, the Pacific is going to be really interesting to watch, especially if even Vegas doesn't, really put it together, because teams we thought that would be at the top, Calgary, San Jose, not so much, and Edmonton and Vancouver both look really good. Also looking really good, you might even say perfect, the most appropriately named line in hockey, I guess, the perfection line.
Yeah, really.
It's funny, if you said to me, out of the teams we all universally would have picked in some order to finish 1, 2, 3 in the Atlantic, Boston, Tampa, and Toronto. If you said to me one of those teams is actually going to struggle to make the playoffs, I would have said Boston.
Same.
Only because as much as they're clearly built for the playoffs, they just don't have the oodles of talent that the other two teams have where they can just sneeze and win 5-1. But here they are. The Bruins look great. This line just keeps getting better.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. When you watch them play, it looks like everything's freelanced, right? Like there's no defined system. I'm sure there is some kind of system in there, but they're all just kind of floating around doing these little spins and everything. They know who each other is going to be, and they can just find it. I mean, that game against the Leafs, I think it shone right through. And I mean, they've been playing together for so long. They have been dominating for so long. It's old hat. We take them for granted, maybe, but they were one of the better stories of the first month of the season too. Just the fluidity, the chemistry that they have together. There's no doubt that they are still the best line in hockey until somebody else does something for a sustained amount of time.
Buffalo or Edmonton, which very good October team ends up with more points? Right now, let me get it right.
Yeah.
Buffalo has 20 points in 13 games.
Yep.
Edmonton has 19 and 14.
Yeah, you asked me that before we sat down here. I still don't have a solid answer. It's a really tough one. Because we've talked about Ralph Kruger and his influence. I want to buy into that. Edmonton's defensive play has been much better, and if that sticks, that's a game changer for them. But I'm probably going to have to go with Buffalo on this because the 5-on-5 scoring for the Oilers beyond Draisaitl and McDavid is still not there, and that's a massive question. If that is just not going to get going. You wonder, do they call up Tyler Benson? I can't imagine that they would try Kailer Yamamoto again so soon. I would think Ken Holland especially would want to give him a full year in the AHL. But if your record is still good, you're going to have that pull to do something like that, to try and find that scoring that you so desperately need. Because if you don't find it ever, even if your defense is better, it's going to be a tough slog right till the end of the season. I just have to believe in. They both got great coaches, but I think at the end of the day, Buffalo might have a little bit more staying power there. I think it could be close. That's a really good question.
Last one. Mike Legg's legacy lives on. The lacrosse-style goals. Still happening.
Still happening. First time in the NHL it's happened.
First time? Was that the first time?
First time in the NHL it's happened.
was the first time.
Yeah. So, the interesting talking point from there is he hits the goalie, David Riddick, in the mask with his stick on the follow-through. Should this be illegal or not? Right? It's not technically high sticking because it's below the crossbar and everything like that. That's going to be the discussion. Obviously, I would think most of us would want to keep that stuff in the game, but it is legitimately a player safety concern that is worthy of discussion. It's a question of, does this become more regular or not? And we have seen various players try it. No one's been able to pull it off until Svechnikov, but now that it's happened, especially, I wonder if you're going to start to see more players get a little bit more aggressive to it. And then defensively, too, if it's going to become more of a regular thing, you're not going to be able to just let that guy sit behind the line. You're going to have to go down, and then what does that do for the defensive coverage out in front of the net?
All right, well, October's in the books. We'll see what November brings. The rest of this pod is going to bring all kinds of great stuff, so stick around. Lots more to come on Tape to Tape. Welcome back to Tape to Tape. If you're listening to this podcast, there's a pretty good chance you're into fantasy sports. So friends, don't forget to sign up for the Sportsnet Fantasy Pool presented by RAM. Check it out, sportsnet.ca/RAM. You can win all kinds of prizes. There's a ton up for grabs, including a 2020 RAM 1500 Sport. I made a big trade. Finally consummated a trade in my pool after back and forth where people were completely trying to gouge me. Then I would completely try to gouge them. And the offer that came to me, I actually replied to the guy. I said, in honor of you just making a fair, decent offer, I'm not going to haggle. I'm not going to say, can we make this third a second? So I'm rebuilding still here. We're both joining this league from the bottom up. We're expansion team. So I had Sergei Bobrovsky, who I do think is going to turn it around. We can save that for another pod.
Sure, yeah.
But I figured I'd trade Bob now for Barrett Hayton, a third-round pick, and Mackenzie Blackwood. So
Yep.
Not too bad. Some decent futures there, I think.
Third round pick in an 11-team pool, so
Yeah.
it's not too late or anything like that. It's funny because I also had a pretty aggressive offer from the same GM.
Yep.
For John Gibson, and it was very tempting. You know what? I have to agree. It was a very solid and fair offer, but it was
you don't
just
see
like
that all the time.
I don't want to give up John Gibson.
All right, so speaking of Mackenzie Blackwood, the New Jersey Devils, I mean, we talked about some of the storylines off the top in October skewing positive for Vancouver and Edmonton and Buffalo. Man, New Jersey, it has been gruesome there. The goaltending has not been good, including
Awful.
Corey Schneider, probably starting with Corey Schneider. I mean, you've got Taylor Hall in this contract year that everyone's been talking about, saying, I'm kind of mad at our fans because they're booing us
not
when
good.
we're 1 for 3 on the
good.
power play. Not a great scene there. And, I don't think a lot of us really expected the Devils to challenge for a playoff spot. But
Some people were.
yeah, at least on the periphery, I suppose. But the bottom line is that it felt like a real positive story. Subban coming in was universally applauded. That was a great deal by the Devils. And Jack Hughes coming in. Now you've got this 1-2. They have signed Nico Hischier to a 7-year extension, which I think is a smart move. And if you're into that kind of talk, you should check out my big read about second contracts coming up on Sunday on Sportsnet. Easy plug there. But yeah, I mean, things are looking pretty rough in Jersey right now.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you had to get Hischier under contract because, I mean, this is really indicative, right? And maybe you get into this in your piece of how teams are going to want to get out ahead of these things.
This is exactly what it's about.
Exactly.
I'm so glad to hear you say that.
Right
okay,
here.
perfect. I'm just glad to know that this piece that I wrote is going to make sense, that people are going to read and be like, yeah, that does. It does.
Yeah, I think the Devils, and even when you look at the Rangers and the Chicago Blackhawks, all of whom are struggling, closer to the bottom of their conferences than they are to a playoff spot right now, it really is a reminder that should drive the point home that it is really tough to get out of these rebuilds. It's so much easier said than done, right? Like, they all did something in the summer to try and, the Rangers and Devils especially, to try and push forward. Blackhawks get like Robin Lehner and all that.
They just got to play them more.
But there was they got to play more. But there was like natural progression. Maybe the team was coming together, but then the reality hit that, you got to play defense too over 82 games, and it's just not working out. The Devils, I wrote about them as one of my takeaways from the month in our Sportsnet NHL newsletter this week. Sign up for that at sportsnet.ca.
We are full of plugs today.
And really about them, it is going to be a tough slog for them to convince Taylor Hall to stay here because he's been to the playoffs once in his career.
I'm going to end up playing devil's advocate here, but you keep going. Keep going.
Yeah. And he's kind of he's alluded to it. He said it, that he wants to go somewhere with his next contract that is, you can't guarantee they're going to get into the playoffs every year, but somewhere that there's a better chance that you're going to be in there more often than not. And with the Devils struggling as they are right now, Subban's going to be a UFA in 2 more years after this one. I know you've got young guys and everything like that, but they're not doing anything with their play. And their fans, the way he called them out, certainly aren't doing anything to sway him to sign a big, long 8-year contract or whatever to stay there. It just seems more likely to me now that he's going to leave, unless something really turns around. I'm not saying the Devils 100% have to make the playoffs this year for Taylor Hall to stay, but they can't be at the bottom. You got to be making a push.
A few random thoughts about Taylor Hall and the Devils, though. I mean, because it was such a coup, it was a great trade getting him, and he is such a great player, and he's still, I think he turns 29 in November, if I'm not mistaken. No, 28 in November, in a couple weeks here. You just kind of get conditioned to thinking like they've got to do whatever they can to keep him. Mm-hmm. But this is a guy who's been hurt a lot. And all I'm saying is, I mean, yes, he is still relatively young, but to me, it's not a slam dunk that you give him a blank check. He also plays the least valuable position on the wing. Mm-hmm. So even if things were going well, though I would certainly make a strong offer if I was Ray Shero, I don't necessarily know that I would have said whatever it takes. We absolutely have to keep this guy who, if you just go through it year by year, has a lot of 53 games, 65 games.
100%. Yep.
So there's that element. The other thing with Taylor Hall, too, is from his perspective, he's a guy who, when he went there, and it was the second year that things went fantastic and they made the playoffs and he was the MVP, he acknowledged, and I thought it was really interesting to hear him talk about this, that it took him a while to get comfortable. And we kind of tend to think of NHL players as just hockey guys who can just go anywhere and play. And I think Taylor Hall has a little bit more of a complicated personality than that, and he was hurt by the trade, and it was a tough move. Now this would be a different kind of move in that he'd be choosing a place and would theoretically be excited about it, but it's more upheaval. Like, do you want to go through that? If it took you a year to rebound and adjust and get used to New Jersey, now you want to go do it again after playing there?
Yeah.
And the last thing that I will say is, we're sitting here talking about how unpredictable everything is. Now, yeah, of course, next summer we're going to be able to circle 8 teams and say, well, those teams, you'd almost bet your life on them getting in the playoffs. But how many of them are going to have, because they're so good, they're already paying players,
Right.
Are they going to have room for Taylor Hall? If you're Taylor Hall, my concern is I'd go pick another team just as the Devils really start to emerge.
Right.
And Mackenzie Blackwood does look like a goalie, and Nico Hischier and Jack Hughes are a great one too. I feel like there's more layers to this than we're kind of conditioned to thinking of, like, the Devils have got to grovel at the feet of Taylor Hall and, beg him and plead with him to stay. Like, well, the Devils, even though things are kind of ugly right now, overall do have some good stuff going on, and I'm just not convinced he's going to be able to go out there and for sure pick his soft landing spot and that team's going to afford to pay him, and off they go.
Yeah. He is the guy, though, who has talked about John Tavares' decision to leave as an interesting one. So
at the very least, it sounds like he wants to go into that week when it's like, all right, let's get a conference room in LA and 5 teams can make their pitch, maybe including New Jersey.
Yeah, his AAV is going to be very, very interesting, especially after what Mitch Marner just signed for, right? This guy, Taylor Hall, has won an MVP. Yes, he's a little bit older, but
this gets into what I'm writing about. Do you want to pay for what happened, or do you want to pay for what's to come?
Yeah, obviously you want to pay for what's to come.
Ideally.
But I think,
and there could be great things to come,
right?
For sure. That's right.
He's
no doubt.
He's not like in his late 30s or anything like that. Let me ask you a huge hypothetical here. So another team that's struggling right now, but has better expectations, San Jose Sharks.
I am.
If Joe Thornton retires, Patrick Marleau's not back, that's some money that's coming off the books there. Maybe Melker Karlsson's $2 million. Like, you just kind of chip away and chip away and chip away. We know their goaltending stinks. It stunk last year, but they were able to get into the playoffs and be a pretty good team because they had the offense that could push it. They still have the 2 big horses on defense, but the offense is not right now enough to offset the bad goaltending. If you're Taylor Hall, would you choose San Jose if San Jose is a bubble playoff team this year, or would you choose to stay in New Jersey with the potentially brighter future that they have there, but it's definitely less certain than it looks like the Sharks could be?
I guess it's tough because San Jose does, even though they're kind of coming to the end of the line with, Pavelski's gone through, but
But you have Timo Meier.
They found the Timo Meyers,
exactly,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is you would tend to have faith in Doug Wilson, and if Taylor Hall goes there, that just further solidifies the idea that this is always going to be a place that can attract people. You're not going to build your team through free agency, but they do have that advantage of guys are going to want to stay there.
Yep.
I do think that's a tough one because I do believe in Ray Shero. I think long term, Ray Shero will get the Devils where he wants them. It just might not dovetail with Taylor Hall's timeline. So, especially if Doug Wilson was telling me the right things about getting a goalie. Yep. At worst, I'm living in Northern California, so if I'm missing the playoffs there, I guess it's a little more palatable. I would think that's a move you'd have to look long and hard at and probably say, San Jose, you would feel better about your odds of getting in year over year and maybe still being able to win with the core of guys or some of the core of guys in Couture who have been there so many times.
I have to also imagine a team like the LA Kings would be in on this.
Yep.
Jeff Carter's contract is coming off the books this summer. Dustin Brown, I think, is another year.
That'd be
he comes
tougher
off.
sell competitive-wise. But
exactly. They don't have that. But again, they're missing... Like, if you look at the Kings, they were bottom of the league last year, I think 30th actually, in shots per game, and they're leading the league in shots per game right now, but they just don't have the goal scorers that are going to have the shooting percentage that's going to be enough to make much of a difference there. But Taylor Hall potentially could be a massive difference maker there.
I'll leave you with this one before we do an entire pod devoted to fake trades, maybe around Taylor Hall. The team that I look at that I'm like, wonder if he does get moved, would this be a fit this year, is a close by one. The New York Islanders.
Yes, that's another one I was thinking
Don't
about.
you think?
Yeah,
would be,
for
he
sure.
wouldn't even have to move, you know?
For sure,
And
yeah.
team that could use a little more punch. They're competitive again on a good winning streak. And, you know, obviously have done amazingly in the aftermath of Tavares leaving, but could use more pure talent. Might be a fit there.
And how about one more? How about the Columbus Blue Jackets?
Oh, yeah. Well, they're just determined to do something, right?
Yeah. They might actually be the team that would throw big money at him, right? Maybe?
Yeah.
I mean, they were going to do it for their guys, and they just didn't want to be there. And again, it's kind of like, it's the same thing with all these teams. Like, none of them are so obvious, to your point, about getting in. But if Columbus isn't at the bottom and they're hanging around the playoffs a little longer than we thought this year, does Taylor Hall look at that and say, I could go there and really make a difference, and they're going to pay me a lot of money? Maybe he's the guy to go to Columbus.
Speaking of Columbus, it was, of course, those Blue Jackets who upset the Tampa Bay Lightning, keeping Rory's streak alive of having his Stanley Cup pick at the beginning of the playoffs go out in 4 games, not even win 1 game in the playoffs. 3 years straight, Rory has pulled that unbelievable
Thanks for
feat
reminding
off.
everybody.
we got to pull that one out as often as possible. We're going to be talking about the Lightning and their somewhat uninspiring October with Erik Erlendsson of Lightning Insider coming up on the other side of the break on Tape to Tape. Time now for our overtime segment brought to you by Subway. No joke, Subway now delivers. This week we are joined by the Lightning Insider, Erik Erlendsson. Erik, how you doing?
I am good, gentlemen, and I use that term loosely. How are you?
We are very well, and I dare say maybe feeling a little better than the Tampa Bay Lightning are after 1 month of the NHL season. This is why we've called you to get the expertise, because from the outside world looking in, certainly things haven't gone exactly as one might expect for this team that just piled up the wins in the regular season. We all know what happened in the playoffs, but you know, just a team that loaded for bear, and I think many of us expected them to come storming out of the gate. What have you seen that is and maybe isn't all that concerning through about a dozen games for this club so far?
Well, there's a few things at play, I think, for this team. Number one, I think we are based on what we saw last year. Like, the expectation is, well, they should just roll for the regular season again, and then they'll be ready for the playoffs. And it hasn't been that way. I think it's hard sometimes for a team in Tampa Bay's situation to be as motivated as maybe some of their opponents in the early part of the season, because you have to climb that 82-game mountain to get back to that. Look, the only way this team finds redemption is in April. It's not in October, November, December. It has to wait until April before they can push past what happened to them in the postseason last year. So you have that going on. And then the other part of it you have is the coaching staff from the day they arrive for training camp is charged that there wasn't this team to be a little bit less high risk. You know, they don't want to be a team that beats themselves. They want to be a team that scores goals for sure, because that's a strength of their team, but maybe not press the play a little bit. Maybe if you're up 3-0, you don't have to push for that 4th goal. You know, you just want to manage your puck a little bit better. Don't turn it over so much, especially at those areas right around the blue line. So they're trying to get that message across a little bit more. I think some of the players have been a little hesitant to kind of change their mindset, or it just hasn't kind of clicked in because they were so successful with how they played last year. So I think it's a transition, I think, in the way they want to approach the game. Not necessarily that they want to play the game, but the way they want to approach things. The issues that they've had so far is the turnovers that they want to cut down are still plaguing them at times. You know, we saw it in the game-winning goal for the Rangers the other night, where Yanni Gourde had a chance to get the puck in down low, chose to curl back high, try and look for a trailer. He's surrounded by 3 Rangers players, and the Rangers go off the other way and score the game-winning goal. Too many of those type of plays are still in their game, and the penalties are an issue. They take way too many penalties. They're somewhere up around 5 per game, and their penalty kill has not been very good this year. That has to be a major concern as you're just here through the first month of the season. So transition in the way they want to play, and some of those things that they want to get out of the game hasn't got out of it yet.
So I imagine those are all, you pretty much covered all the bad habits that Steven Stamkos talked about when he kind of called the team out there, and I believe it was the second week of the season, very, very early. How did the team respond to that after he said those things?
They responded the right way. They started the season with those 3 games and 4 nights, and they got totally dominated by the Carolina Hurricanes, and that kind of brought the comments from the captain that came out. And, they lost the game in Ottawa that a lot of people are going to look at that say they shouldn't have lost, again, because a couple of turnovers that cost them. But, Ottawa had won a game at that point, and they were kind of hungry to get that first win, and they just outplayed Tampa Bay. But, they turned that around, and they went into Montreal, and they beat Montreal. They went into Boston, who was riding extremely high at that time, and beat the Bruins in a shootout. They've beaten the Penguins in this last little stretch. So they've kind of answered it. They haven't cleaned up everything in their game, and it's going to take a little bit before they get comfortable with that thought process. But I think they've responded in the right way, with the exception of the penalties. There's too many of the stick penalties that are driving the coaching staff nuts. The hookings, the holdings, those type of things. So for the most part, they've responded the right way, but they still got some things they got to work on.
Ultimately, do you think that, after the way last season ended, getting swept in the first round of the playoffs, that, I hesitate to say the word adversity because I don't know if this is adversity. They're not really off to a bad start, maybe just not as dominant as they were last year. But ultimately, do you think that this kind of maybe uphill battle is going to be good for this team in the long run?
It can never hurt. It's easy to say that they didn't face any of that last year, and that's why they got swept in the playoffs. I mean, they faced some of it. I mean, they lost Andre Vasilevsky for a month from November to December last year, so they had to deal with the absence of him. In terms of the record, no. I mean, they ran away from everybody. Once they got to January, after the December they had, I mean, they basically had the President's Trophy wrapped up by the middle of February. And from that aspect, I guess you can say they didn't face the type of adversity, and then when it hit them in the playoffs, they, for some reason, a veteran team like them didn't know how to handle it. So, it doesn't hurt to go through some of this. They had some injury bug kind of catch up with them here towards the end of the month as well. They're missing some guys in their lineup. The more you have to go through that and you find success through it and see the light at the end of that tunnel, it can do nothing but help you to prepare for situations that are going to come down the road, because you never know what you're going to face. And if you've been through it before, you're kind of ready and maybe a little more prepared to do it than maybe they were last year.
We've been harping a bit on the negatives here with Tampa, but it's not like there hasn't been some good developments. Kevin Shattenkirk might lead the list of those. Of course, signed after he was bought out by the Rangers, making just 1.8, 4 goals and 5 assists, if I'm not mistaken, so far. What have you seen from Mr. Shattenkirk on the blue line?
His style of game fits exactly what the Lightning want out of their defense in terms of moving the puck, being involved in the rush. One thing that we've noticed about him that, you have to see sometimes to see, you see a player up close on a consistent basis. He is so good at getting shots through. He can find those lanes, and, he's picked up a couple of assists that way. So he's been just a perfect fit for them. The defensive side has never been his strength, and they're still trying to find out who he's best going to be paired with kind of moving forward. But his offensive game suits this team to a T. He has mentioned that so many times about how he just feels so comfortable already. He scored 2 goals already off the rush, one in Boston, one in Toronto, by being that type of guy who can get up the ice. So for the money he's making and the value he's given them so far, it's been a perfect fit for both sides. And he's even said it, and he's mentioned this a couple times after the season has started. He feels he has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder to kind of get back to being the player he was, especially in the days with St. Louis, whereas the Lightning kind of have that same mentality because of what happened in the last year. So there's been so many perfect fits for him.
You mentioned this, and I just want to pick up on it, Eric, but do you get the sense from this team sometimes that it really is hard to operate when your only shot at redemption does come 8 months from now? I mean, no one's going to be talking about how they're doing unless it's in this context when they're not, shooting the lights out the way we expect in the regular season. I mean, this team, it's not just last year. This is a team that has been, really knocking on the door, went to the final in 2015. I mean, there's one step left for it, yet they've still got to go through this 82-game schedule. And now, you look at when a team like Buffalo rises up to the top of the Atlantic, Montreal looks better, Florida looks better. I mean, I don't think anyone's ever truly concerned the Lightning are going to miss the playoffs, but it must be a bit of a battle for this core group of guys who, really are focused on that one thing, which is the last step on the mountain and winning the cup.
It's a mental challenge. There's no doubt about it. And it's amazing because they finished October with a 6-4-2 record. And it's not bad. I mean, 14 points in the first month of the season. It's not the Colorado Avalanche, but it's a pretty good record. Mm-hmm. But yet, people want to nitpick them because, how come you're not winning every game? And the flip side of that is, if they were winning every game, what would people say? It doesn't matter. Show us what you do in the playoffs.
It's so true. It's so
they're kind of caught in between there. Yeah, they're kind of caught in between.
Yeah.
So it seems like no matter how, unless they started the season really, really flat, it was going to be an issue with how they started and how people perceive them because of how so many things went well for them last year. But I think when you start to dissect their regular season last year, they were able to outscore some of their mistakes, and we saw that a lot, especially when Andrei Vasilevskiy was not there. And then Andrei Vasilevskiy would cover up a lot of those mistakes as well, and then they would be able to go down and score a couple of goals and pick up the victory. So when the coaching staff kind of dissected things over the summer and when the team came back, this was some of the stuff they talked about. Cut down on the high danger chances against. The expected goals rate, they were one of the highest. Goals against rate, they were one of the highest in the league in terms of that, which I think was an eye-opener to at least some of the players that I talked to about it. And the penalties, those are the three things that they really wanted to clean up. But it's a mental thing because, just as I said, if they were 14-0 right now, people would be saying, so what? Who cares? Show us in April. They're 6-4-2, so we're struggling. How come you're not winning more games? So they're kind of caught in between in how people perceive them. So I guess what really matters to this team is how are they doing internally? How are they doing in getting this new mindset? And that's going to be a process. It could take another 6 weeks. It could take another couple of months before they really feel comfortable with it. So as long as they're just, they're there and they don't fall too far behind, and I don't think they will, this team will be fine. They've had a difficult schedule. 6 of the first 7 games are on the road. They got this trip to Sweden, so it's a 12-day trip. So they've had a lot of time away from home. So I think once they get past this whole Sweden trip, I think it's an opportunity for them to kind of catch their breath a little bit and then get into the meat of their schedule.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, the Sweden trip, the Global Series, 2 games against the Buffalo Sabres, who are exceeding their early season.
Yeah, also those points are important, aren't they?
On Friday and Saturday night, November 8th and 9th. Just tell us kind of what that trip is going to mean for this team. Are they talking about it much? You got to... Victor Hedman, I would imagine, would be pretty excited to head back for this, although he's dealing with a short-term injury here as well. Will he be playing in that game? And just what are the guys saying about it?
Well, the good news is it sounds like he should be available to play in those 2 games in Sweden. They talked about him being able to get back to practice next week when the team does get over there. So that's the good news for Victor Hedman because this does mean a lot to him to be able to go back and play in his home country and take the Lightning sweater back to his home country. And he's talked a lot about that. This trip is a fun trip. I mean, this has been circled on their calendar, obviously, since it was announced, even before it was announced way back when, to have it. There's a bonding element to it. There's even John Cooper talked about, there's a lot of people on this team who haven't been to Sweden, including himself. So they're looking forward to seeing a different culture and all that. But at the end of the day, it's a business trip. You got 2 important games against a team that's gotten off to a really good start. So they're going to buckle down, especially later in the week as they get closer to these 2 games. But it should be a lot of fun. I know in talking to some of the guys, they're really looking forward to the opportunity to kind of expanding and getting out there and seeing a different area of the world.
All right, Erik. Well, we will be checking back in with you later on in the year to see how the Lightning are doing, and certainly all of us will be watching this team come spring. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, I appreciate it, guys. Take care. We'll talk soon.
All right, that is Erik Erlendsson. You can find his work at lightninginsider.com. You can follow Erik on Twitter at Erik, ERIK _Erlendsson, ERLENDSSON. That is going to do it for this episode of Tape to Tape, but make sure you're coming to sportsnet.ca to find all of our awesome work there. Make sure you're following Rory on Twitter at Rory Boylan, myself at Dixon on Sports. Thanks again to Erik for joining us today. Check back next week for more glass rattling hockey action on Tape to Tape.